The moment an entire room stops talking, you know something important is about to happen. On a busy Friday evening, Maple and Stone Bistro was exactly what people imagined when they thought of a perfect night out. Warm lighting reflected against polished wood tables. Soft jazz drifted through the dining room. Servers moved carefully between crowded aisles carrying plates of grilled salmon, ribeye steaks, and fresh pasta. Couples celebrated anniversaries. Families shared stories from their week. Business executives discussed deals over dinner. Every table was occupied. Every seat seemed valuable. Near a large window overlooking downtown Dallas, Angela Monroe sat alone at a table set for one. She wore a cream-colored business suit and carried herself with quiet confidence. A leather folder rested beside her chair. She occasionally reviewed a few documents between bites of dinner, then looked out the window at the city lights. Nothing about her behavior attracted attention. In fact, most people barely noticed her at all. That was about to change. Officer Caleb Turner entered the restaurant shortly after 7 o'clock. His presence immediately caught the attention of several customers. A uniform naturally draws eyes, especially in a crowded restaurant. He exchanged a few words with staff near the entrance before slowly scanning the dining room. Then his gaze settled on Angela. Something about her sitting alone at one of the most desirable tables in the restaurant seemed to bother him. He watched her for several seconds before beginning to walk in her direction. A young server noticed and looked confused. The hostess glanced toward Angela's table and then toward Caleb. Neither seemed certain what was happening. Angela remained focused on her meal. She did not see him approaching until he stopped beside her table. "Ma'am," Caleb said, his voice loud enough for nearby customers to hear. "I need to speak with you." Conversations at the surrounding tables immediately softened. Angela looked up calmly. "Of course," she replied. Caleb folded his arms. "There appears to be some confusion regarding your seating arrangement." Angela glanced around the restaurant before looking back at him. "I do not believe there is any confusion." Caleb's expression tightened. "This section is reserved for special guests and private reservations." Angela nodded slowly. "Yes, I know." The response seemed to surprise him. "Then you understand why I need to verify that you belong here." A nearby couple stopped eating altogether. At another table, a businessman quietly lowered his glass. The atmosphere in the restaurant began to change. Imagine enjoying a peaceful dinner when suddenly everyone around you starts watching. Imagine feeling dozens of eyes turn toward your table without understanding why. Angela remained composed. "Officer," she said politely, "are you certain this conversation is necessary?" Caleb looked around the room as though seeking silent confirmation from the crowd. "I am simply doing my job." The restaurant grew quieter. Even the music seemed distant now. A young server took one step forward as if to intervene, then stopped. Angela noticed, but said nothing. Instead, she calmly folded the document she had been reading and placed it inside her folder. Then she looked directly at Caleb. "Before you continue," she said softly, "you may want to make absolutely certain you understand whose table this is." Around them, every customer watched in complete silence. For several long seconds, nobody in Maple and Stone Bistro seemed willing to move. The restaurant had been filled with conversation only moments earlier. Now an unusual silence hung over the dining room. Forks rested motionless above plates. Glasses remained untouched. Even servers carrying meals appeared hesitant to continue walking. Every eye remained fixed on Angela Monroe and Officer Caleb Turner. Caleb looked down at her with growing confidence. Angela's calm response had not changed his mind. If anything, it strengthened his belief that he was handling the situation correctly. "Ma'am," he said, "I am trying to give you an opportunity to cooperate before this becomes more complicated." Angela folded her hands neatly on the table. Her expression remained composed. "Complicated for whom?" she asked quietly. The question caused several nearby customers to exchange glances. Caleb seemed irritated by her lack of concern. "For everyone involved," he replied. Angela looked around the restaurant. She noticed the young server standing several feet away, clearly uncomfortable. She noticed a family near the center of the dining room pretending not to watch while watching every second. She noticed the hostess near the entrance speaking nervously into a radio. Something larger was beginning to unfold. Imagine sitting peacefully through dinner and realizing an entire room has stopped talking because of a conversation at your table. Imagine knowing the people around you are drawing conclusions before they know any facts. Angela understood exactly what was happening, yet she showed no sign of frustration. "Officer," she said, "have you spoken with the manager?" Caleb shook his head immediately. "That will not be necessary." Angela raised an eyebrow slightly. "You seem very certain." Caleb glanced around the restaurant once more. "I have enough information." The words landed heavily. Several customers visibly reacted. A middle-aged woman sitting near the window frowned. An older man quietly shook his head. The atmosphere continued shifting. People were no longer simply observing. They were beginning to question what they were witnessing. Near the hostess stand, two employees exchanged worried looks. One of them quickly disappeared through a set of swinging doors leading toward the administrative offices. Angela noticed that too. Her attention returned to Caleb. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the most important information is the information you have not collected yet." Caleb sighed impatiently. "You are avoiding the issue." "No," Angela replied. "I am asking whether you are willing to verify your assumptions." The restaurant seemed even quieter now. A nearby server set down a tray with unusual care, trying not to interrupt the moment. In the background, soft jazz continued playing through hidden speakers, though it sounded distant compared to the tension surrounding Angela's table. Then something unexpected happened. The hostess suddenly looked toward the rear hallway and straightened her posture. Her expression changed instantly. The young server who had left moments earlier reappeared, walking quickly beside a man in a dark suit. The moment several employees saw him approaching, their faces shifted from concern to alarm. Angela noticed immediately. She leaned back slightly in her chair. Caleb remained unaware. He was still focused entirely on proving himself right. But across the restaurant, staff members were beginning to realize that a conversation which should never have happened was about to collide with a truth that could change the entire evening. The man in the dark suit moved quickly across the restaurant floor. Employees instinctively stepped aside as he approached. His pace was controlled, but the concern on his face was impossible to miss. Several staff members watched him with growing anxiety. They understood something that most customers did not. Whatever was happening at Angela Monroe's table was far more serious than Officer Caleb Turner realized. Caleb remained focused on Angela. He had not yet turned around. "I am asking you one final time to explain why you are seated in this section," he said. Angela looked past him briefly and noticed the approaching manager. A faint expression of understanding crossed her face. Not satisfaction, not relief, simply recognition. The moment she had anticipated was finally arriving. "Officer," she replied calmly, "I believe the answer to your question is walking toward us right now." Caleb frowned and turned. The restaurant manager, Michael Harris, had reached the edge of the table. His face immediately changed when he saw Angela. "Ms. Monroe," he said, almost breathless, "I am very sorry for the interruption." A murmur moved through the dining room. Customers exchanged confused looks. The young server standing nearby visibly relaxed, though concern still lingered in her expression. Caleb looked from Michael to Angela and back again. "You know her?" he asked. Michael blinked in surprise. "Of course I know her." The answer landed heavily. The silence inside the restaurant deepened. Imagine standing in a crowded room and realizing the story you believed only moments ago is beginning to fall apart. Imagine watching certainty disappear one fact at a time. Caleb straightened his posture. "There appears to be some confusion regarding her reservation." Michael looked genuinely puzzled. "Reservation?" he repeated. Angela remained seated, allowing the conversation to unfold naturally. Michael glanced toward her table and immediately noticed the leather folder resting beside her plate. His expression changed again. This time, concern became alarm. "Officer," he said carefully, "who informed you there was a problem?" Caleb hesitated for the first time that evening. "I observed the situation myself." Michael lowered his voice slightly. "Did anyone from management ask you to intervene?" "No." "Did any employee report an issue?" "No." Michael took a slow breath. Around them, dozens of customers listened without pretending otherwise. Several people had completely stopped eating. One couple near the center of the dining room leaned forward in their seats. The entire restaurant seemed suspended in anticipation. Then Michael looked directly at Angela. "Ms. Monroe, I apologize." Angela offered a small nod. "Thank you, Michael." Hearing them address each other by name immediately changed the atmosphere again. Caleb noticed it. The customers noticed it. Even the staff noticed it. The distance between assumption and reality was shrinking rapidly. Michael then turned toward Caleb. "Officer, There is no issue with this table. Caleb crossed his arms. You seem very certain. Michael looked at him for several seconds before responding. Yes, he said quietly. I am. Something about his tone caused a visible reaction among nearby employees. The hostess lowered her eyes. The young server pressed her lips together. Angela simply watched. Then Michael glanced toward the private office overlooking the dining room floor and made a decision. The truth could no longer wait. And within moments, every customer in Maple and Stone Bistro would learn exactly why Angela Monroe had never needed a reservation at all. Michael Harris looked across the dining room before returning his attention to Officer Caleb Turner. The restaurant manager was normally calm under pressure. Running one of the most successful restaurants in Dallas required that skill. Yet even he seemed unsettled by what had just happened. Around them, customers remained completely silent. Nobody wanted to miss what came next. Angela Monroe sat quietly at her table, her dinner growing cold while an entire restaurant waited for answers. Caleb noticed the attention from the crowd and interpreted it as support. He still believed he was protecting the integrity of the restaurant. If there is no problem, he said, then perhaps you can explain why everyone suddenly seems so concerned. Michael studied him carefully. Because this situation should never have reached this point. The answer only deepened the tension. Several customers exchanged curious glances. The hostess stood frozen near the entrance. Servers lingered beside tables longer than necessary. Even the kitchen staff occasionally peeked through the service doors. Imagine watching a room full of strangers realize they are witnessing a moment none of them expected. Imagine feeling the atmosphere shift as people slowly understand that the story they assumed was true may actually be completely wrong. Michael turned toward Angela. Ms. Monroe, would you like me to handle this? Angela offered a small smile. I believe the truth can handle itself. Her response caused several nearby customers to look at her differently. There was no anger in her voice. No attempt to embarrass anyone. Just confidence. The kind of confidence that comes from knowing facts are on your side. Michael nodded. Then he looked back at Caleb. Officer, you mentioned reservations. Yes. You mentioned restricted seating. Yes. And you believed she was not supposed to be here. Caleb folded his arms. Correct. Michael glanced around the restaurant. The silence had become almost surreal. The soft music overhead now felt distant. Every customer seemed focused on a single conversation happening beside one table near the window. Then Michael reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and removed a small access card. He placed it gently on Angela's table. Several employees immediately recognized it. Their expressions changed. One server covered her mouth. Another lowered his eyes. Caleb noticed the reaction but did not understand it. What is that supposed to mean? He asked. Michael took a slow breath. Officer, there is something important you need to know. Angela remained seated, saying nothing. She allowed the moment to unfold naturally. Michael continued. This table is not reserved because of a special event. Caleb frowned. Then why is it reserved? Michael looked directly at him. Because it belongs to her. The words landed like a shockwave. Several customers visibly reacted. One man nearly dropped his fork. A woman sitting near the bar leaned forward in disbelief. Caleb stared at Michael without speaking. For the first time all evening, uncertainty appeared in his expression. Michael pointed toward the large framed photograph displayed prominently on the wall near the entrance. Until that moment, almost nobody had paid attention to it. Now dozens of heads turned simultaneously. Beneath the restaurant logo was a photograph showing three people standing together during the grand opening ceremony years earlier. One of them was Angela Monroe. And as customers slowly began connecting the pieces, the entire dining room realized that the woman sitting quietly by the window was far more than a guest. For several seconds after Michael Harris pointed toward the framed photograph, nobody in the restaurant seemed capable of speaking. Customers stared at the wall, then at Angela Monroe, then back at the photograph again. The resemblance was unmistakable. The woman sitting quietly by the window was standing in the center of the grand opening picture displayed beneath the restaurant's logo. The realization spread from table to table like a silent wave. Caleb Turner slowly turned toward Angela. Earlier that evening he had looked at her and seen a customer who did not belong. Now he was looking at evidence that challenged everything he thought he knew. What exactly are you saying? He asked. Michael appeared genuinely surprised that the answer was not already obvious. I am saying that Ms. Monroe does not need a reservation to sit here. The manager paused briefly. She helped build this place. The words settled heavily over the dining room. Several employees lowered their eyes. Others watched Angela with admiration. The young server who had first sensed something was wrong looked relieved. Imagine believing you understand someone's place in a room, only to discover they helped create the room itself. Imagine realizing that every assumption you made was built on information you never bothered to verify. Angela remained calm throughout it all. She did not stand up. She did not point toward the photograph. She did not ask for recognition. In fact, she seemed almost uncomfortable with the attention. "Michael," she said softly, "there is no need to make this larger than it already is." But the moment had grown beyond anyone's control. Customers were now openly discussing what they had witnessed. Some remembered how confidently Caleb had spoken earlier. Others remembered the way Angela had responded without raising her voice. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Michael looked toward Angela with respect. "You may not want attention," he said, "but people deserve the truth." Then he turned back toward the crowd. "Ms. Monroe is one of the founding partners of Maple and Stone Bistro." A collective reaction moved through the restaurant. Several customers gasped quietly. One woman covered her mouth. A businessman sitting near the bar leaned back in disbelief. The story they thought they understood had completely transformed. Caleb stood motionless. His certainty was disappearing piece by piece. He looked toward the photograph again, then toward the access card resting on the table, then toward Angela. Every detail that had seemed unimportant earlier now carried meaning. Angela noticed the shift in his expression, yet there was no satisfaction in her eyes. No desire to win, only composure. That calm dignity made the moment even more powerful. Michael gently picked up the access card from the table. "This card grants access to every private area of the restaurant," he explained, "including management offices." Several customers exchanged stunned looks. Caleb remained silent. For the first time all evening, he appeared uncertain what to say next. Around them, the restaurant was no longer simply watching a disagreement. They were watching the collapse of an assumption. And as the weight of that realization settled over the dining room, another truth was beginning to emerge. The most important lesson of the evening had never been about ownership, status, or authority. It was about how quickly people decide who belongs before taking the time to learn who someone truly is. The restaurant remained unusually quiet even after the truth had been revealed. Normally, a busy Friday evening at Maple and Stone Bistro would be filled with laughter, conversations, and the steady rhythm of dinner service. Instead, dozens of customers sat watching a moment that had become far bigger than a simple misunderstanding. Angela Monroe remained seated at her table, her posture relaxed, her expression calm. Across from her, Officer Caleb Turner stood in silence. Earlier, he had spoken with complete confidence. Now that confidence had been replaced by reflection. Michael Harris sensed it immediately. The manager understood that everyone in the restaurant was waiting to see what would happen next. Not because they wanted conflict, because they wanted resolution. Imagine realizing that the person you questioned belongs more deeply to a place than almost anyone else in the room. Imagine understanding that the story you created in your mind never matched reality. Caleb looked toward Angela. For the first time that evening, he seemed less interested in defending his position and more interested in understanding what had happened. Around the restaurant, customers continued watching. Some had stopped eating entirely. Others quietly discussed the lesson unfolding before them. Yet nobody left. Everyone felt that an important moment was still ahead. Michael broke the silence. "Ms. Monroe has spent years helping build opportunities for employees, local suppliers, and community organizations through this restaurant," he said. Several staff members nodded immediately. A server standing near the kitchen entrance smiled slightly. Another employee looked toward Angela with visible admiration. These were not reactions given to a stranger. They were reactions earned over time. Caleb noticed. Every detail seemed to challenge his earlier assumptions. Angela finally spoke. "Michael, please." Her voice was gentle. "The staff has work to do." The response surprised many people. After everything that had happened, she was thinking about the comfort of her employees and customers rather than herself. The reaction across the dining room was immediate. People saw something they had not expected. Strength without anger. Confidence without arrogance. Michael nodded respectfully. "Of course. Yet before he could step away, a customer near the center of the restaurant quietly began clapping. The sound echoed through the room. For a brief moment, everyone looked toward him. Then another customer joined. Then another. Within seconds, applause spread throughout the dining room. It was not loud or theatrical. It was sincere. Customers were not applauding because Angela owned part of the restaurant. They were applauding because of the dignity she had shown when she could have reacted very differently. Angela looked around the room, clearly uncomfortable being the center of attention. She offered a small smile and a grateful nod. The applause gradually faded. Caleb stood quietly through all of it. No one insulted him. No one mocked him. In many ways, that made the moment even more powerful. The truth had already spoken for itself. As conversations slowly returned and dinner service resumed, the atmosphere inside Maple and Stone Bistro began to feel normal again. Yet something had changed. People who entered the restaurant expecting an ordinary meal were leaving with something else entirely. A reminder that assumptions can be wrong. A reminder that respect should come before judgment. And for Officer Caleb Turner, the most important lesson of the evening was only beginning to settle in. As the evening continued, Maple and Stone Bistro slowly returned to its familiar rhythm. Servers carried fresh plates through the dining room. Conversations gradually resumed. Glasses clinked softly. The scent of grilled steaks and fresh herbs once again filled the air. Yet beneath the surface, something had changed. The customers who remained were no longer simply sharing a meal. They had become witnesses to a lesson few would forget. Angela Monroe finally returned her attention to the dinner sitting in front of her. The meal had been interrupted long ago, but she seemed completely unbothered by it. She thanked a server who refreshed her glass of water and offered the same warm smile she had given employees throughout the evening. That simple gesture did not go unnoticed. Several customers watched with admiration. Imagine being given every reason to react with anger and choosing grace instead. Imagine possessing the power to embarrass someone publicly and deciding not to use it. That kind of restraint often leaves a stronger impression than any confrontation ever could. Across the dining room, Officer Caleb Turner remained near the entrance. He could have left. No one was preventing him from doing so. Yet something kept him there. Perhaps it was the realization that the situation had never been about a restaurant table. Perhaps it was the uncomfortable awareness that he had formed conclusions long before gathering facts. Whatever the reason, he remained quiet. Michael Harris eventually approached him. The manager's tone was professional. "Officer, I appreciate your willingness to help keep people safe," he said. "But tonight should be a reminder that appearances do not always tell the full story." Caleb nodded slowly. There was no argument left to make. Around them, employees continued working. Yet even among the staff, conversations had changed. Several younger workers spoke quietly about what they had witnessed. One server admitted she nearly assumed the officer was right simply because of his authority. Another employee confessed that she had done the same. The discussion became less about one person and more about human nature itself. Angela finished reviewing a few documents from her leather folder before closing it and setting it aside. A customer seated nearby eventually gathered enough courage to approach her table. He introduced himself politely and thanked her for the example she had set. Soon another customer did the same. Then another. None of them asked about ownership. None of them asked about business success. Instead, they spoke about dignity, patience, and character. Angela listened graciously to each person. Her responses were thoughtful but brief. She never presented herself as extraordinary. She simply treated every interaction with respect. As the night moved forward, the energy inside the restaurant became unexpectedly uplifting. Strangers who had never met before found themselves discussing fairness, assumptions, and the importance of listening before judging. The evening that began with tension had transformed into something entirely different. And as Angela looked around the dining room filled with customers, employees, and quiet conversations, she understood that the most meaningful victories are not the ones that prove someone wrong. They are the ones that encourage people to become better than they were before. By 9 o'clock, Maple and Stone Bistro looked much the same as it had at the start of the evening. The dining room remained full. Soft music drifted through the air. Candles flickered across polished tables. Yet for many of the people inside, the restaurant no longer felt like the same place. A simple dinner had become a memory they would carry long after the check was paid and the night was over. Angela Monroe sat quietly near the window, finishing the final pages of a document she had been reviewing before the interruption began. From a distance, she appeared completely ordinary. That fact struck many customers in a new way now. Earlier, several people had looked at her and made assumptions. Now they understood how dangerous assumptions could be. Imagine how many stories remain hidden because people decide who someone is before ever speaking to them. Imagine how often opportunity, wisdom, or leadership sits quietly in a room while others overlook it. Throughout the restaurant, conversations continued circling back to the same lesson. A young couple discussed how quickly authority can influence perception. A group of business professionals reflected on hiring decisions and first impressions. Even employees found themselves talking about the importance of verifying facts rather than relying on appearances. The evening had become more than an incident. It had become a mirror. People were seeing pieces of themselves in what had happened. Near the entrance, Officer Caleb Turner remained thoughtful. The confidence that had defined him earlier had been replaced by something more valuable. Reflection. Nobody had demanded an apology. Nobody had publicly attacked him. Yet the silence of the customers, the patience of Angela, and the facts revealed by Michael Harris had forced him to confront a difficult truth. Sometimes mistakes begin long before actions do. Sometimes they begin with assumptions. Michael checked on several tables before eventually stopping near Angela once more. "Thank you," he said quietly. Angela looked up from her folder. "For what?" Michael smiled. "For reminding everyone what professionalism actually looks like." Angela laughed softly. "I was only having dinner." Michael shook his head. It became much more than that. Around them, employees continued working with renewed energy. The tension that once filled the restaurant had been replaced by something warmer. Respect. Not the kind that comes from ownership or status. The kind that comes from character. Several customers preparing to leave stopped by Angela's table one final time. They thanked her for the example she had set. One elderly woman placed a hand over her heart and said, "You taught this room something important tonight." Angela smiled gently. "I think we all learned something." The response lingered with those who heard it. Because it was true. The lesson belonged to everyone. As the evening moved toward closing time, the city lights outside the restaurant windows shimmered against the Dallas skyline. Cars passed quietly below. Inside, Maple and Stone Bistro continued serving meals, just as it had every night before. Yet the people leaving carried more than leftovers and receipts. They carried perspective. And somewhere among the fading conversations, one truth remained impossible to ignore. The strongest person in the room had never been the loudest voice. She had been the one who stayed calm long enough for the truth to speak on her behalf. The final customers began leaving shortly before closing time. Chairs were quietly returned beneath tables. The glow of the dining room softened as the evening settled into its final hours. Outside, the lights of downtown Dallas reflected against the restaurant windows, creating a calm contrast to the tension that had filled the room earlier. Angela Monroe remained seated for a few moments longer, gathering her documents and preparing to leave. Around her, employees completed their closing routines. Several offered warm smiles as they passed her table. She returned each one. Nothing about her demeanor suggested she had just become the center of an unforgettable evening. Imagine carrying influence without needing to announce it. Imagine possessing authority without demanding recognition. That was what so many people had witnessed that night. Michael Harris approached one final time. "Thank you for staying," he said. Angela smiled. "This restaurant has always felt like home." Michael nodded. Tonight reminded everyone why. They exchanged a brief conversation about upcoming community projects, employee scholarship programs, and plans for future expansion. It was the kind of discussion they had shared many times before. Yet for anyone overhearing it, another layer of the story became clear. Angela's connection to Maple and Stone Bistro had never been about ownership alone. It was about investment in people. It was about creating opportunities. It was about building something that could serve the community long after any single evening was forgotten. Near the entrance, Officer Caleb Turner remained for a moment before preparing to leave. The restaurant was nearly empty now. The crowd was gone. The attention had faded. Only the lesson remained. As Angela walked toward the exit carrying her leather folder, Caleb stepped forward. His voice was quieter than it had been earlier. "Ms. Monroe." Angela stopped. "Yes." For a brief moment, he searched for the right words. Then he found them. I should have taken more time to understand the situation. Angela studied him calmly. Understanding usually takes less time than fixing a misunderstanding afterward. The response was simple, respectful, honest. Caleb nodded slowly. He understood exactly what she meant. There was no lecture, no public embarrassment, no demand for anything further. Just a truth he would likely remember for years. Angela offered a small smile and continued toward the door. Outside, the evening air felt cool and peaceful. Behind her, the restaurant continued winding down for the night. Inside, employees finished their work. Customers returned home with stories to tell. And one ordinary dinner had become something far more meaningful. Because the most powerful moment of the evening was not the revelation that Angela helped own the restaurant. It was the realization that dignity does not need to raise its voice. Truth does not need to force its way into the room. Given enough time, both eventually reveal themselves. As Angela disappeared into the Dallas night, the lesson remained behind like an echo. He thought he understood who belonged at the table. But that night, the table taught everyone a different lesson. Respect should come before assumptions. Character should come before judgment. And sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one who lets the truth speak for itself.